ready to continue? Well, the last panel of the afternoon, tomorrow is going to be also an intense day, but not as today. I hope that you enjoyed coffee. Now we are going to have our last panel that it is about infrastructure, but it's more focused on mobile and wireless infrastructure. Our moderator is going to be a friend of the school, Mr. Diego Molano Vega. He's an international consultant in digital transformation for the public and private sector, and he was the Minister of Communications in Colombia, and he was our host in 2012 when we organized the school in Bogota. Carlos Rebellion, Director of Government and Public Policies for Emerging Countries in America from Intel. Mauricio Nasta, from Network Evolution Director from Latin America, South Ericsson. Martha Suarez, President of the Dynamic Spectrum Alliance. I can't see the members of the panel, but I'm sure they are already there. Hello. How are you? Fine, and you? I'm sorry I can't be there with you. We have 60 members here in the audience and 140 members in the online audience, mainly from Latin America, but also from all over the world. Thank you, Diego. It's a pleasure to have you here. I was remembering the 2012 school in Colombia when you were the main host and you offered the infrastructure and your help. And it was a very important school at the time because of the number of people in the audience and the importance, not only in Colombia, but all over the region. It's a pleasure to see you online. And welcome, Mauricio, Marta, Oscar, and Carlos. It's a pleasure to see you at least online. I don't know why this panel has mostly members from Colombia, but I want to welcome you all. We are going to talk about wireless infrastructure of internet in the region. I don't know, Olga, how the audience is going to ask the questions. Maybe we can listen to your presentations first, and then we can answer the questions that may arise. We're going to talk about the promise of the industry about closing the internet access gap, which is generally with wireless infrastructures, because wired infrastructures are kind of difficult because it costs a lot of money. And we have a huge penetration in Latin America because of the wireless infrastructures, 3G, 4G, and now 5G, as well as Wi-Fi and some projects with public Wi-Fi. So in this panel, what we want to do is to talk about the current situation and the future situation. And with Marta, Mauricio, Carlos, of course, is known as Rebe. So we're going to give you a brief introduction on the topic. Oscar is the director of CITEL in Washington, and he has a global view, and he can maybe explain the situation of the region and which are the challenges that we are facing. Hello, Diego. Good afternoon to all of you. Thank you for the invitation to talk about the different ideas that the players in the industry have about this topic. I have a brief presentation to show you. I wanted to be a co-host to share my screen, but maybe you can tell me if you can see the presentation. Well, first of all, taking into account that there are some members in the audience here, I think that it's important to try to agree on some concepts so that we all share the same information. At the international level, when countries reach certain agreements as regards the International Agency of Telecommunication, through those discussions and debates, agreements are reached to make definitions and to draft the telecommunication regulations. The Americas region is region number 2, and it is the one that has a unique position. So in all the research groups, what we are doing is developing these inter-American agreements for the next discussions that we are going to have. And in this panel, what we are going to mention about Wi-Fi and the 5G process, you're going to notice that we have been discussing these topics for many years and trying to reach agreements. And the next meeting is going to be at the end of the month in Trinidad and Tobago. As regards contents, whenever there is an international conference, there are different topics in the agenda. And we also have working groups. I'm going to offer my presentation so that you can share it with all the audience. We have different topics such as mobile, fixed, and broadcasting in group 1, and then the future works in group 5, which are both important groups. As regards the panel, there is something important that has to do with the different discussions in the industry as regards Wi-Fi and the mobile industry that has to do with the 6 gigahertz band. Maybe Martha, Carlos, or Rebe can talk about this. There's a huge discussion as regards the megahertz in this band, and if this band is being totally used, or if it's only a part of the band that is being used, then maybe it's 2 megas. And what the Wi-Fi industry has been doing, Martha is going to talk about the details, is that there's not going to be a possibility of having all the benefits of the high speed of maybe 1 gigabyte at it has been mentioned. And there are going to be challenges as regards network cohesion because of some technology issues. I'm not going to get into the details, but it's going to be necessary to have huge or bigger channels with a higher broadband to have that kind of Wi-Fi speed. But the mobile industry has defined 3 bands, low, medium, and high. Here we have the medium bands. And what they are saying is that it cannot be the 1200 total, and that there cannot be a decision to use the total band of the Wi-Fi because it would be against the idea of the mobile industry to make sure that the estimates of data traffic demand is fulfilled. So what we are doing here is, I'm not going to go into details, but we have the different channels and the sizes. And we can see that there's a possibility of having bigger channels with 6 gigas. And when we have a higher broadband, we may have even 7 channels with 160 megas. And it's going to be compatible with the previous Wi-Fi systems. In some other regions in the world, such as Europe, they have decided to use the 500 megas, and that considerably reduces the channels. Instead of 7, there are 3. So what is the situation in the Americas? The US made the decision of using the 6 gigas of the band, and the other countries follow through. Brazil, Canada, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Honduras, the Dominican Republic. Probably Martha is going to mention some details that I'm missing. And something that I believe is important is that some of the countries are waiting to see what happens in the next radio conference next year. But that is not necessary, because the 2023 conference is talking about the high spectrum of the band for region 1, and we are region 2. So it's not going to be necessary to wait. The decision has been made as regards region 2, and that is something that is going to be considered for the European countries next year. Anyway, when we start talking about 5G and Internet of Things, what we see is that there is the satellites are not present. And I believe that there are many satellite companies, and many of them are working as regards Internet of Things with the connectivity in remote areas. We are talking about applications for the agricultural sector, the oil and gas sector, energy sector, logistics. And this is a different kind of infrastructure than the one that we have in the cities. And some way or another, that is going to depend on having that fiber optic connectivity. There's going to be a need of having the different technologies. And we cannot talk in isolation of these technologies, because all should be included in this industry. I'm not going to get into details, but what I wanted to say is that something important is that regardless of the decisions of the Wi-Fi that you may use at home, like 4, 5, or 6 gigas, what we need to take into account is that in the networks that you use for Internet of Things, there are going to be millions of devices connected. And if we don't have basic practices to make sure that there is a new access to information without a third party or a hacker being able to remotely affect us at home, or maybe affect an industry, the security software should be updated. And something very simple is to use networks for guests. And doing that, we can avoid some of the problems that we may face in the network. And something that is basic, that probably most in the audience always ask, like for example, to change the password for the devices that we have at home. By default, we authorize the use of easily found passwords, and independently of the technology that we use, we need to make sure that those risks are neutralized. Thank you for this time in the panel. Thank you, Oscar, for your introduction. Of course, Oscar has mentioned Wi-Fi, 5G, and Internet of Things, and the different satellite solutions that are offered. In the development of this network, specifically in rural areas, but we're going to focus a little bit more on the topics. And I wanted to ask Martha, who is an expert in these spectrum topics, I wanted to ask you about Wi-Fi. Probably most of us is what we mostly use every day, the 2.4 and 5 Wi-Fi. Which are the problems of the 2.5, 2.4 and 5, and which would be the advantages or the benefits of 6? Thank you, Diego. Thank you, Olga, for the invitation, and the rest of the panelists. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. And as regards the evolution, Wi-Fi is a technology that has been evolving, specifically the 2.11 standards. We have been seeing the evolution, the DAX, and now we call the Wi-Fi Alliance decided to call it Wi-Fi 6. This recent standard, Wi-Fi 6, allow us to operate with higher broadband channels of 160 megahertz. That is the first answer to your question. Why 2.4 is not enough? Because 2.4 band only has 83.5 megas. So in that band, it's not possible to have a 160 channel. Then we have the 5 gigahertz band. Each country has different regulations. Some countries may have segments for different segments, but the spectrum is reduced for the 160 megahertz channels. In some countries, we may have only one channel. So we need to take into account the needs, the underlying needs. Allowing these channels means that by having a higher broadband, we may deliver this speed that users want. Users today want higher speeds, and they require apps with low latency. So when we have higher broadband channels, we can send information in less time and to comply with the latency requirements. So that is one of the topics. And the other thing is that Wi-Fi is not an exclusive, a unique standard. You may be in a building and the different apartments may have the Wi-Fi network. And the standard is that all those users can coexist at the same time. Since it is a standard in which we have many channels operating at the same time in a single place, specifically in populated areas, as 160 channels is limited. So this has been studied for many years. So the idea is to think about having more capacity for these channels. And here is when we think about the 6 gigahertz band, which follows the 5 band. So as regards hardware, we can see today that there are many devices available in the market because the transition is easy. It allows to have 7 channels. So imagine this in a shopping mall or in a free Wi-Fi area. They are all going to have a good quality of connectivity. So what happens is that when there are many users, the broadband starts decreasing. If there is not enough spectrum, users are going to continue having a lower quality. It is also going to allow having more users at the same time. WPA3 is the security with Wi-Fi 6. and it allows us to have data transmission rates of 2 gigabytes per second. The speed is 9 gigabits point 6 per second. What you can expect at your phone or tablet is 1 or 2 gigabits per second. So Wi-Fi is like complementing other technologies in cities in which there's a lot of deployment of fiber optic. We are not going to have the bottleneck. It's not enough to have fiber optic and not to have the speed. But it is also important in rural areas where there is no fiber backhaul, but most of those connections are through a backhaul link that could be through satellite technology and is complemented with Wi-Fi, maybe in public or open points or for small providers, as we have heard in the previous panel. About the free spectrum. And also for mobile connections, part of the mobile network's traffic, because of the decision of the users, is downloaded to fixed networks. So when you go home, you receive the messages for updating and for downloading maybe a movie or anything when you have Wi-Fi. So it is something that is user-oriented. And sometimes, of course, as any kind of technology is going to require certain spectrum, in some countries, maybe there's been 20 years in which there was no spectrum offered for Wi-Fi. It's interesting to listen to this Wi-Fi 6 idea. And what Oscar was saying is that we all need to agree with those frequencies. What is going to happen if we don't agree on this? What is going to happen if the region makes different kind of decisions as regards this 6 gigas band? Is it going to work? If, for example, I am in America and I'm in Europe with my computer or my tablet, is it going to work? What is going to happen if I use a router that has all the spectrum band open? I bought it in the US, for example, and it was set for Europe, where there are not so many channels available. What is going to be the case there? The fact that today Wi-Fi is cheaper compared to other technologies has to do with the fact of harmonization. Today, probably Carlos can mention a little bit about this, with computers and tablets, Wi-Fi is included because it's something that is global. If the decision is not massive or global, costs are going to be increasing for users. So since it's not globally produced, let me give you an example. When we use a harmonized band for cell phone communication, the idea is that it's going to be globally harmonized so that we will have those economies of scale. That goes hand in hand. So in this case, the risk may be to not have a globalized economy for that band, because the 8 countries represent more than 90% of the GDP of the region, and some countries are not going to change their decision. So here, the devices are not going to be so cheap, and we don't run the risk of the fiber, where somebody would buy a device and would connect it to other region. So in order to protect that, when you are going to use it in another country, you need AFC, and the devices are going to include that. So the risk has to do more with maybe computing devices. You can control the local market, but if we have a global market, there would be different challenges as regards devices. So, Rebe, you are developing chips for computers. Intel is one of the companies that produces more chips for tablets and computers. What is going to happen with Wi-Fi 6? Are you already producing and selling the Wi-Fi 6 chips? What am I expecting in my next computer? Can I go to the market and buy a Wi-Fi 6 computer? Thank you, Diego. And I want to thank the South School of Internet for the invitation and the possibility of sharing with my colleagues this panel that is a very interesting one. There's a lot to be defined in the future of wireless communication, and the future of wireless communication depend on all the elements that were mentioned. Being successful with deployment of Wi-Fi and 5G and satellite technologies and everything that Martha was mentioning. There's a well-known quote that means that many cables are necessary for having a wireless communication. Sometime to make communications wireless, what we have is mobility. We can share in the case of Wi-Fi, and the most successful countries are the ones that can mix all these technologies. So going back to your question, there are already devices in the market all over the world, and in Latin America, of course, is not the exception, with Wi-Fi 6, which uses all the 6 gigahertz band that is called Wi-Fi 6C. And to give you an idea of the numbers, there are more than 800 models all over the world of devices. There are 100 access points. To give you an example, any Intel Core computer, last generation Core computer, already includes a Wi-Fi 6 module. It can be connected to the whole band, taking advantage of the 160 channels. So the business thing is not an issue. For the deployment of Wi-Fi 6E, there are computers, smartphones, tablets, TVs that can be connected to Wi-Fi 6, as well as access points such as routers that can be at home, at the office, at a hospital, maybe a school, where Wi-Fi in the education field is more intensive. Diego was mentioning public Wi-Fi projects. There are many. There's a project that started a long time ago in Panama and Colombia, and now we have it in Chile, the Dominican Republic, Costa Rica, because it is the most economic way of deploying networks that are going to be shared in areas where people have no access to maybe a subscription. So Wi-Fi 7 is going to be in the near future. And if it is the same case with Wi-Fi 6E, maybe in 2024, there are going to be devices with Wi-Fi 7 that will allow 3 continuous 320 channels. And that is going to allow uses that were impossible before, such as augmented virtual reality, 8K, and those kind of applications. So it is convenient to be in a region in which the approval of the whole band, in general terms, we are agreeing in the region, and Europe is about to be defined about this. So I'm optimistic about Europe, because since today there's no clear use of the band that is different from Wi-Fi, we are optimistic as regards the development that Wi-Fi is going to have, that will allow us to interrupt that bottleneck that is starting to be caused with the 4G and with the arrival of fiber optics to many different places. So it is improving in the homes, but in the local network or the hospital network, Wi-Fi can be a limitation. So there is already availability, and what is happening there, Diego, is that maybe it is slower than the mobile networks, because in the mobile networks we have to tender the spectrum and then the users start subscribing. In the case of Wi-Fi, little by little operators start changing the routers, and sometimes we already have devices that will allow us the last generation Wi-Fi and the user may not know it. So this these are processes that may take a couple of years in some countries, but in countries such as ours, it may take 5, 6 years until all the routers are changed or updated. It is interesting to see how Intel is leading all this technology and working soon in Wi-Fi 7 when we still are debating Wi-Fi 6, discussing Wi-Fi 6. So I wanted to ask you about the reality of the market with the war in Ukraine, the conflict between China and the US, and what is taking place in Taiwan. The whole world is kind of nervous as regards the production of chips. So there is a huge problem all over the world. The US decided to invest public money in order to stop that dependency on China and Taiwan. And the world is concerned about this. So what is the role of Latin America? What can we do to mitigate that risk? All this is connected because you started talking about the fact that Wi-Fi 7 is in the near future. Unfortunately, in the Wi-Fi technology, Wi-Fi 7 is going to use the same band as Wi-Fi 6. So the future of Wi-Fi, not only in the short but also medium and long term, is going to depend on the fact that that band is already available. And that takes us to this conversation that you are mentioning, that also has to do with the fact that we were not very conscious about the availability of the chips, because you may think that maybe you won't have computers because of that, but this means that you're not going to have radio technology, and that is going to have an impact on networks, not only on devices but mobile networks. There are many technologies that have to do with access networks that are computerized, and we have this trend of going towards access networks, virtual access networks, and it's going to depend more on the availability of these chips. And also the automotive industry, for example, the defense industry and the aeronautic industry, aviation industry is going to depend on this. And we also need to mention the entertainment industry as well as healthcare. Today, many of the healthcare devices are automated, so this lack of chips may have an impact, a comprehensive impact, and that was the case with the pandemic. For example, production of vehicles decreased, and the industry stopped producing those chips to produce more for schools and teleworking, and the automotive industry recovered sooner than expected, and there were no chips for that industry. So there are a lot of initiatives that you were mentioning to attract activities that have to do with the semiconductor chain. So if I have a semiconductor industry in my country, I'm going to be included as a country there, and I'm going to contribute to that industry, and I'm going to have a better position, and I'm going to give better possibilities to my local industries. Unfortunately, it's a costly industry. And of course, what is happening is that It's an industry that was mostly concentrated in Asia. Um, in the past, it was half and half between America and Asia. But now, what we are trying to do with the European and American initiatives is to attract the manufacturing to the US and to Europe so that at least 30% of the global production is not located in Asia, but maybe shared between Europe and the US. And to conclude, let me talk about Latin America. Latin America doesn't have production capabilities, but it has capabilities in other areas of the value chain. For example, the assembly. There's some in Mexico and Brazil. And also validation of these chips is paramount. And that is being done a little bit in Brazil and Mexico. And something that is also important is in the case of Ukraine, I have seen that in the IDB, you talked you talked a lot about the talent in Latin America, and that is the case for the chips. One thing is maybe a developer for web applications or mobile applications, but we need software developers for the machine language that we need for validation, for setting the chips in the devices, and many that have been located in the past in Ukraine and Russia. We have only a few in Latin America, but there's a great opportunity for the Latin American talent because of costs and the possibility of learning that. Most new engineers are in Mexico, Brazil, some in Colombia. So what we need is that governments, for example, in the case of Mexico, try to develop semiconductor industries in the region in those areas of the value chain where there are huge opportunities. This is very interesting. There are also some things that are difficult to agree upon. For example, the purchasing power. If we unify the market, we can see that manufacturers are buying a lot. We are reaching half the time that we have been assigned for the panel. We have talked a lot about Wi-Fi, but I wanted to ask Mauricio about 5G. In Latin America, there's been a huge deployment of 3G, a little bit of deployment of 4G. Mauricio is going to tell us how much 4G is being used and what is the situation of 5G in Latin America today. Mauricio, welcome. Good afternoon. Yes, that's true. There's been deployments of the different technologies, as you mentioned, in the case of 4G. 2 and 3G are well known. Those are technologies that still exist and are going to continue to exist. And with time, probably some are going to stop being used. But nowadays, as regards 4G, there's been some considerable deployment, not at the same level of 3G, but when these 2G and 3G technologies start becoming obsolete, 4G is going to take the place of that technologies, and 5G, as all the new technologies, is going to be covering the capacity demand, specifically in big cities. And also, since in 5G we have different uses, it is also vital to consider that it's not only to cover mobile broadband, but in the case of 5G, we also have new uses. So low concentration, maybe in big cities at the beginning. There's going to be also cases of use in remote areas, and also they are going to use 5G there.
So, as any other technology or new technology, this starts when there is a focus of attention or awareness, either the consumers or the carriers, and then it expands to the rest of the region. I would like to show you some slides. Do I share the slides or we can do it by way of discussion? In the interest of time, probably we can hold it just a discussion. What are the advantages for somebody that doesn't have any idea of technology or doesn't know what spectrum is? What are the possible advantages of 5G for in comparison to 4G or 3G? At first, as in Wi-Fi, the user experience is totally different since we have wider broadband or bandwidth channels. When we speak of 5G, it can be used in different frequency bands, whether it is frequently bands that are used by LTE or 5G, and we're going to see a negligible difference. It's going to be just the same as 3 or 4G. In terms of latency, 5G is going to be much better and it's highly noticeable, but in throughput or speed, they're going to be remain the same. The large difference lies where 5G is developed in frequencies such as the medium frequencies, 3.5 megahertz. That's the kind of spectrum in that range. So carriers usually have 50 or 600 megahertz of band, and they may implement a 5G carrier with enough broadband or bandwidth to carry a differentiating factor to the user experience or make a difference because of the bandwidth of that spectrum. And especially if you have the high frequencies, that's the 26, 28 gigahertz. That range is for scenarios where you have remote, confined frequencies or ranges, like for example, soccer stadiums. In the soccer fields, we have a high concentration of people with large number of traffic, whether it is download or upload links. And the high frequencies or the high bands really make a difference because we are in a small, relatively small premise where that coverage can be given or provided by the high frequencies, and we can make use of the high frequencies. So where a carrier starts in the range of 400 megahertz, reaching up to 800 or even higher. So the difference in terms of user experience is pretty large. Another factor that comes together with the personal user's experience is not only the idea of having video gaming that I am going to beat others with low latency rates. No, it's not like that. But in the case of throughput, the idea when it comes to video gaming managing higher speeds, it tackles the issue of latency that will become lower. And 5G has different releases. The 5G non-standalone, that is the 5G that we just started deploying as of the beginning of 5G that traces back to the beginning of 2019, the end of 2018. And that's the 5G that was highly supported on LTE. That 5G was really good to carry to the marketplace to launch a high 5G release showing or reaping the benefits. 5G in the medium range accounts for 1.2 gigabits per second. In millimetric or high bands, we're speaking of 3, 4 gigabits per second. So it really makes a difference. Another story is the 5G standalone, which is a 5G that is not really supported on the 4G network. It's a 5G that is a standalone and is the target 5G because all carriers will aim to that target. That 5G facilitates to you have a user's experience that is totally different. Either you deploy a toolbox that cannot really be implemented with a non-standalone, for example, a smartphone or a tablet could be partitioned between having a personal use where I hold or I save my applications and another disk partition where part of the phone or the smartphone has apps that are related for business, home banking, for work, having higher security thresholds, or for some special activity. The disk partition uh, facilitates that I pay for those applications. However, if I use that bank because of higher security reasons, that app or that partition shall be borne by the bank. Or if I have at work Microsoft Teams as a video conference application, I use it because it's a corporate edition. So it's borne by Ericsson, the company where I work for. The same goes for telephones. If I have to use another app for a specific purpose that is in the interest of a third party, the third party is going to pay or is going to bear the cost. So you start changing business models for carriers where the multiplicity of users experience is endless. So the user's experience could be seen as higher throughput, higher video quality, having higher speeds for video gaming, as something self-explanatory, but also could be seen as something that you pay or you don't pay. America Latina is waiting for the implementation of 5G, so users could have a higher throughput, higher speeds. So that is the dream in Latin America, the download 1.2 gigabytes or even higher to 3 gigabytes. That would be great. But what are the determinant factors for 5G to be successful? If you want to be a country as successful in 5G, what is required from that country to have 5G? What are the determinant factors to be successful in order to attain 5G so people can use it? Success of mobile technologies depend on using something that could be scalable, that has economies of scale. For economies of scale to work, you have to use the right spectrums that are homogeneous across the board, and especially for the use for those spectrums that could be scalable. So far, the NT78 for 3.3 to 3.8 gigahertz, you have the spectrum and you have the large number of spectrums. For mobile telephony, the success comes because of the low budget device. If it has low cost, it is widely adopted by users, and that's one of the pillars. The other building block to be considered is the technology transformation adopted by the carriers in order to tell the final users those business models that are different from what traditionally they expect. So 5G brings to the table new players that could be considered or not, that they range from application providers, for consumers, or industrial applications. I mean, the carrier dealing with industries, having a specific network dedicated to users or industrial users to serve those needs. That that is not easy, requires a high level of transformation on the part of the carrier because they need to think outside the box in line with the new clients that he may target to. When you speak of this, it gives me the feeling that Wi-Fi 6 and 5G compete with each other in such a way. Do they compete or not? No, they do not compete at all. They are supplementary. Wi-Fi 6 could operate perfectly well in certain environments and in some others where large coverage extensions are required with higher mobility and with a high range of systems reliability. Five nines of reliability. That's 99.999. So in those kind of cases, mobile networks or mobile technologies could play a key role in performance. So they're supplementary. They supplement each other. It's not that they compete. There's no rivalry. It's just like fiber or mobile telephony to carry that access to the last mile. They supplement each other in the cities. Fiber is a solution where it's standard or laid and the cost is not that expensive, but in the remote areas, the immediate location or the immediate solution until we get fiber is through satellite or wireless. So they supplement each other. Oscar, that has participated in spectrum allocation. Oscar, what other determining factors of success will you have to consider for a country to implement 5G? Timely, considering all technologies, especially protecting those that are in the band or in the frequency, in such a way so we can incentivize the investments. Who is going to eventually invest? Well, this will depend on at the national level, how the bids are going to be prepared. That will depend on every single country. But what we want to pursue is to strike a balance between that going beyond taking bans or segmenting bans or favoring deployments, especially when we have ecosystems creating economies of scale for all kinds of technologies and finding a wider ecosystem, which is key. When we have just a few players investing and deploying networks, it takes a specific situation is detrimental for certain scenarios. For example, something that is very popular with 5G, corporate vertical networks, private networks, everything that is connected with 5G. If we favor something is when we have flexible stakeholders that may have access to that spectrum to deploy their networks or to have neutrality, and that will increase the ecosystem. As the ecosystem increases, there are going to be a large number of investors. And if we minimize the risk of picking one or the other, so we should have flexible policy making. You're all very diplomatic. So basically, you did not take the question that I asked. So there's a political dilemma here because, from the point of view, from the geopolitical point of view, this conflict between China and the United States is one of the top five conflicts. I can tell you what we're going through in Intel since we are a global carrier of manufacture. We provide to a global market, and at the same time we gotta be in line with international American regulations. So we shouldn't overlook the importance of this conflict, and the variables indicate that this is going to be persistent. It's not that they're going to settle amicably all conflicts immediately. So, as a corporation, we should comply with any kind of mandate dictated by any country in terms of tariffs, regulations, prohibitions, exports and imports prohibitions. And that is the core of the dilemma, whether it's one country using against the other, what can be shipped, what cannot be shipped, what can be sold or can't. So we're very respectful in complying with standards. There are other guiding principles, such as the principle of technology neutrality and open standards. When we discuss this with any country and when we're asked, okay, what is the source of this technology or what is the source of the other, the best way or the best model is that neutrality is the principle, and authorities should advocate for the selection or for the regulations to be technologically neutral. Otherwise, you are trapped with a vendor. Sometimes you are trapped in a city or you have a vendor locking product in a certain city, and that municipality basically is dedicated to that technology or that brand specifically for a long time. But regardless of the struggle between China and the United States, that is the principle that we pursue, principle of neutrality. With Wi-Fi 6, for example, we said, okay, the spectrum decision should be in the lives of the hands of a few that invest more. If they invest in a single country, we shouldn't be listening to that person if he's a heavy investor in one country or the other. I mean, they should operate in the same level playing field. It's not that we should overlook one or the other. So everybody that has been involved in public policy making, we know we are full aware of this. And we know that independent authorities, we need to be neutral in terms of geopolitical discussions or conflicts. So I would like to join to what Oscar said. Because if the investor conditions or investment conditions are not there, either you favor the United States or China, you're not going to decide to invest in a certain location. So you need to benefit from those resources to have enough money and to spend that money. But we know that that money is not available. Europe, the United States, large powers are joining forces in order to close the fiber optics divide that Oscar was telling us, or by collecting less money per spectrum to have higher deployments and to take on more responsibilities of coverage. So basically, we need to think outside the box, having a larger fund and investing one thing or another. This is not the challenge ahead of us. This is not enough now. There's a question for Mauricio now. There's a trend in Latin American countries. First is to have or to load the coffers of governments with money because we can reflect or pass on the cost to consumers. And this has not been effective with distribution. And third or fourth is if we have rebuilding carriers on the part of the state to deploy this kind of structures, and there's a new trend to have a single operator or carrier providing a shared network to the rest of them. Mauricio, could you take this question? What are your thoughts? What is the best scheme for a country to allocate the 5G frequency to carriers? And those carriers in turn can deploy the necessary technology that it will eventually reach most of the consumers with a high quality of services and cheaper ones. That's what we said at the beginning. Allocation of bands shouldn't be money wise or compensatory. And that would be the first step, the first measure. As Oscar said, most of the countries are making that decision or taking that path. To cover remote areas will depend on every single country and every particular situation, whether it is remote areas or countries where you need to close the digital divide. Domestically speaking, every single country has its own way of doing and thinking about initiatives. But from what we see at the global level, in general terms, the solution lies in co-partition the equipment and eventually partitioning the spectrum. And carriers, they said, okay, pitching with some equipment, and you can use the premises equipment and another location that could be invested by other carrier, etc., etc. So those agreements are finally signed and are finally prosperous and successful in order to serve these areas that are typically small communities or remote areas are an effective solution. It requires a set of operators or carriers, and it's not that complex because technology helps with the implementation and with a large number of ways to implement it. Because even though we share the equipment, each could have a spectrum or they could share the spectrum to compile the range of spectrums and to share it. In that regard, there's a lot of experience from the technological point of view that helps with these solutions to be easily implemented and to be widely discussed by carriers. We're concluding with our remarks because our time is up, and I don't know if there are questions from the audience, either face to face or online. We have many questions in the audience. We have people online and we have people face to face. There's one question. Marta, let me pass you the roving mic so we can ask that question, and later I will read the questions that are online.
Ahora sí,
Ahora sí.
ahora sí.
Hola, sí, ¿qué tal? Acá Marta Maule de Argentina.
My name is Marta, and I come from the University of Avellaneda. It's a privilege to have Marta as a professor or as a trainer, instructor at the International Telecommunications Union. Excellent panel. Congratulations. There's something that really caught my attention because usually they don't bring this to the table. And it's, I don't know if Mauricio signal was cutting off, but I was paying attention to the success factors in order to attain 5G. And you said that they were supplementary. However, Mauricio kind of branched out and instead of addressing the part of the state and included the obligations or requirements on the part of the carrier. They said the carrier should transform itself to develop business models and to add value in the chain. and digital transformations that come with the market's evolution. And at the same time, considering that Oscar touched upon some of the factors that are in the hands of a public if the public sector. So I would like to ask Oscar because he mentioned something that deregulate is the same as flexibilization, or probably he can tell me what flexibilization means as a success factor for a country. And if there's time, probably Mauricio can tell us about some of these items of transformation that should be made by the carrier because the PPP is very important. Public and private partnerships are very important for this to work. Flexibilization and deregulation are totally different, and both things need to be made. There are all standards that the rendering of services is not feasible. You cannot reach 200 localities with a technical center. Nobody wants that. And that's different. So you need to think of co sharing there and finding another mechanism so it could be attractive and to reach those locations that are remote or innovative mechanisms that we seek to have PPPs. And it's what Marta asked. It's not being involved in detail of what the carrier does. They need to adjust their networks, adapt, and it's part of their business. It does not depend on the regulator and the policy because that's what they need to do in order to operate. And that it doesn't require any other things. Mauricio, in connection with the transformation that carriers have undergone, and as a matter of fact, they have started doing that, is related to different aspects. One is to daisy chain relations with the different carriers in the cases of use. The 4G cases are final consumers. The carrier reaches the final consumer and targets that, and that's it. But in 5G, when you have many use cases that have grown exponentially, the carrier may choose, in line with their marketing strategy, to see what kind of or what part of the value chain they can reach. It could be an ISP, as internet service suppliers have done so, or go higher up the chain, like, for example, set up the platforms that are so necessary for the different developers of applications can deploy those applications and offer them to the market, and probably they can collect the fee for the use of that application. Or they can even go higher up the chain and they develop themselves those applications, depending on the strategy that they determine. And that is in line with the transformation they have to pursue. So it's not only facilitating developers market access to take those developments or applications, but also the carrier has to find ways to monetize those products, and they have to think of what the business models are that he's going to pursue to serve the needs of all stakeholders. So to serve the needs of the state of the final consumer at a relative low cost or convenient cost, in line with the benefit they get, so they could have their own share. And that is the business model they need to pursue. And that is the transformation that should be made by the carriers. The business models and the monetization of those carriers. Yeah, but I need to close. I have two questions online. Valentina Gracia from Italy is a student that is online We know that it's too late, but she's asking if the development of the connectivity in the internet would it be the rule or the next step? And if Wi-Fi 6 networks for IoT devices may cause security problems for users or have security breaches in standalone systems. Marta, you're the expert in Wi-Fi 6. Given the large deployment of Wi-Fi, what are the risks that we are going to run in terms of security breaches? There are just quite a few elements to answer this question. Wi-Fi 6 improved the security breaches. We are with WAP 3 instead of WAP2. And there are some companies that provide this service. At the end of the day, any vulnerability could be exploited, not by the system in itself, but by the way it is managed by users. So the Wi-Fi standard per se has control mechanisms and access mechanisms that allow to ensure security levels. However, Oscar said that it depends on the way users manage these networks, not only traditionally, because they could be free use spectrum or any other use. And I was told that at the end of the day, what we pursue are systems, IT systems. So most of the vulnerabilities are exploited in the information. So we have to see how users use the tools, how they configure that. And it's not the access issue, but the way how access are managed at the application level. Are you going to break the rules in IoT applications? I think that we are heading towards that because all countries and all the economies are racing for efficiencies, for automation of the Internet of Things. So IoT is reaching all corners of the world and is highly promissory that for example in mining or agriculture, that could be used through the automation of many of the tasks, and that will require the Internet of Things to work. So depending on the environment, like open environments, 5G by default will be the technology to connect. And for indoor environments, manufacturing environments, Wi Fi could be the best solution because both of them are more secure than its predecessor technologies. So that will depend by the management of users, not by just having updated legal frameworks by regulators. For example, we have the need to regulate critical applications, critical mission applications, key verticals such as energy, water treatment provisions, financial services. So technology is more runs better than security. And mostly most of the devices have security features that we usually don't care about or we don't usually use. More than 65% of the cell phones connected to the internet in Latin America, they have some kind of malware. So probably the viewers that we have here have a malware in their cell phones. So what are we going to do to prevent this from happening? Are we taking the necessary measures to prevent the malware from entering our phones and breaching information? Let me sum up with a minute of information and some key takeaways. Primarily focus on a question, and that is that the future is wireless, with wireless infrastructures mounted on top of wired fiber optic infrastructure. More than 70% of Latin America is connected to the internet. However, are we well connected to the internet? Because statistics revealed that households with children that needed to go to school, depending on the country, Latin America accounts for 7 or 16% are well connected. So most of the children over the internet were not well connected or they didn't have a good connectivity. They didn't have a good terminal and they couldn't learn. So if you are asked on average how they use the internet, they said, okay, they have many limitations. It's not good for many features, like for teleworking, for school, or for any other applications. So the average percentage of good connected people is very, very low. And that is why the new Secretary General of the ITU told us that the best thing is to leverage the use of applications that could have a spillover effect on consumers so they can really leverage the internet and its applications. Part of what CITEL is doing, supported by two foreign offices, in December we prepared a guideline of 21 transformations that should be made in policy making and regulation in order to ensure digital transformation in the rural sector and those unattended areas. There are recommendations I cannot explain because it would take me another 15 minutes. But through Oscar, probably we can share that document because it's really useful. The idea is first we have to implement, we have to provide technical guidance. We are including technical guidance too for countries, especially guiding political leadership to embark on this journey. Marta? I believe what we expect is with CITEL together with the members, we were part of the work supporting CITEL and striking a balance, urging authorities not to partition prevent, but to have a comprehensive growth with every single technology and providing a different ecosystem, attracting different levels of investments to every single country. And it's important to think that despite the countries that have different levels of connectivity or low connectivity, most of the connectivity is done through mobile phones or smartphones. So it's very important to strike a balance between mobile and fixed traffic and to have a coexistence of both technologies because that is highly needed in schools, in households, and libraries. But on the other hand, we have to analyze what it has been done in the mobile arena so we can grow and coexist hand in hand. How do we leverage this connectivity with more people so they can benefit from this technology? We may have coverage, however, we cannot use this technology. Okay, that's a good question. Let me tell you that I totally agree with what others have agreed upon. I'm going to underscore what Marta said to have coexistence because each one is supplementary in one way or another. One technology supplements other technologies, so it is important that all of them coexist. So the necessary resources for that coexistence is that they should be available for carriers so they can take it to the consumers. So spectrum should be allocated appropriately with the technologies adopted adequately, considering that they're all crucial or important. Carlos, how can we leverage this? Because this is available. Sometimes 4G is available, but people cannot use it because they have to buy a cheap terminal or they don't have money enough to purchase a telecommunication plan for his needs or for his family. Basically, we are based on what the investment requires, and the most important thing is investment. So 70% of users, of internet users with minimum connectivity, is not going to take us to robust tasks or robust connectivity that provide us with higher productivity. If we were able to carry coverage, we need to carry speed, more advanced devices, and to be adopted by people. This will require a digital agenda that I'm not seeing in the region, with a few exceptions. However, I have seen progress that has been made in the Dominican Republic and in Brazil, where they allocated 5G spectrum. They opened the 6 gigahertz band. So they included telcos, small ISPs. So it's like that's the new trend of digital divide or the digital solutions that is just involving the three telcos and the satellite connections that Oscar was telling us about. It's very promissory. We have to experience new technology. Brazil is very interested in using Wi-Fi in cars or vehicles because new technology allows for that. And you were saying that governments want to become involved as with public investments in spectrum. If you don't have enough ISPs, probably municipalities can make investments with neutral ISPs or with the electricity grid that is generally public service, investing not only in electricity but in the backbone to reach with higher capillary systems. And I underscore Brazil or the Dominican Republic, but I believe that probably there are other examples in the region, and this transformation is required. Thank you very much for this interesting panel. We discussed spectrum allocation. I know that there are pending issues like the conflict between the United States and Chinese on this technological struggle that they are fighting or they are waging besides technology. They clearly was intended to be illustrated by this example of 5G networks and deployments. Thank you very much for having invited us, and I wish you success with the South School and Internet Governance. Thank you very much. I really appreciated these topics. I really enjoyed this talk. Thank you very much. A round, large of applause for our panelists. I would like to thank all panelists, Diego, Marta, Carlos. Great pleasure to have you here, Oscar, and Mauricio. Mauricio was the only Argentinian among all Colombians. Greetings from Buenos Aires to all of you. Thank you very much. Let me tell you that tomorrow morning we're going to have a representative coming from the US State Department. So we're going to ask him that question between the United States and China. I think that I can follow this in YouTube because there are some pending issues or pending questions that I have. I was asking or wondering of what Carlos said about training in low cost services for chip training courses. I'm sure that this implies a great opportunity. Probably we cannot manufacture chips, but we can produce software. We will resume at 9, 8:45, okay? 8:45 so we can start and resume the session at 9. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. For those of you that are not from Buenos Aires, please enjoy the city. Have a great time. See you tomorrow.